My name is Delilah Moore. I'm 58 years old, born in Columbus, Georgia, and the truth is that my childhood felt like one long reminder that I was always too much for the family I came from. Too loud, too emotional, too quick to protect the people I loved. I learned early that love, in my house, had limits, and I always pushed past them. I was the older sister, the one who held Naomi's hand on the first day of school, the one who stepped in when kids teased her, the one who made sure she never felt alone. And I guess that meant I grew up believing it was my job to keep her safe, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. Looking back now, maybe that was the start of everything. People telling me I felt too intensely, that I reacted too strongly, that I was made wrong somehow. But being made wrong was the only thing that let me see danger before Naomi ever could. It was the only thing that made me step forward when everyone else stepped back. And on the day the world stopped spinning, that instinct is the reason I did what I did. I was 33 the day they locked me away, but in my mind I can still feel the heat of that Georgia afternoon on my skin, like it's happening again. I remember the sharp smell of gasoline in the air, the dust on the road swirling up around Naomi's feet. And that man, God, I can still see his hand fisted in her shirt, dragging her toward that truck as if she were nothing but an object he had the right to take. People always ask why I didn't think, why I didn't call the police, why I didn't try to talk him down. They don't understand that there wasn't time, that my body moved before my brain even caught up. All I saw was Naomi's face, wide, terrified, pleading, and something inside me snapped clean in half. Not the kind of snap the doctors talk about, the kind they love to diagnose. I'm talking about the moment when your soul breaks open and everything becomes painfully clear. I knew what he would do to her if he got her into that truck. I knew it in my bones. And clarity like that doesn't ask permission before it acts. The truth is, I don't even remember making a decision. One moment he was pulling her, and the next I had that rusted iron shovel in my hands, one I'd leaned against the porch just that morning, and I brought it down on him with all the strength I had been told my whole life to swallow. People screamed. Someone yelled my name. Naomi fell to the ground and scrambled back, crying harder than I'd ever heard her cry. But all I remember is the sound. God, that awful sharp crack, the sound of his arm breaking. And the silence that fell right after, the way everyone seemed to step back from me as if I had suddenly become something monstrous. It wasn't pride I felt. It wasn't satisfaction. It was something colder. Something like the knowledge that there was no turning back, not after what I'd done, not after what they saw. When the police arrived, nobody said I saved her. Nobody talked about how he was dragging her toward the truck. Nobody cared that she was trembling so badly she could barely speak. What they saw, what they cared about, was the man on the ground screaming and holding his arm. I remember trying to explain, trying to tell them she was in danger, that I had to stop him, that if I hadn't stepped in, we'd be dealing with something far worse. But the more I talked, the more their eyes slid past Naomi's tears and locked onto me, the big sister who always cared too much, felt too much, reacted too much. Violent outburst, unstable behavior, uncontrolled aggression. They spoke about me like I wasn't even there, like I was already a file in a drawer waiting for a label. And maybe I was. Maybe I had been for years and just hadn't noticed. By nightfall, they took me to Crestwood State Hospital, and that was it. No trial, no conversation, no real chance to defend myself. Just a set of handcuffs, a doctor with tired eyes, and my parents standing in the corner looking more ashamed than afraid. That was the moment I stopped being a woman, a sister, a daughter. I became a danger, a diagnosis, a liability they needed to contain. They called it an episode, but to me, it was the clearest moment of my life. I saw exactly what was happening, exactly what needed to be stopped, and I acted. And that single moment, the one where the world froze and then shattered around me, cost me 25 years of my life. Crestwood wasn't a place you stumbled into. It sat way out past the railroad tracks, behind barbed wire fences and locked gates, like a secret the city didn't want to remember. Nobody ever said its name out loud unless they had to. You didn't drive past it, you didn't ask questions about it, and you damn sure didn't visit unless you had a legal obligation. But me? I didn't walk through those gates. I was dragged, hands cuffed, arms bruised. My parents didn't even ride with me. They followed behind, quiet and ashamed, like I was some burden they'd finally found a place to hide. When they signed the papers, they couldn't even look me in the eye. I remember that first night like it's carved into my bones. The walls were too white, so white it hurt to look at them. Everything smelled like bleach and cold metal. They took my clothes, gave me a paper-thin gown, and led me to a room that felt more like a freezer than a place meant for healing. The mattress was wrapped in plastic. The windows didn't open. I sat on that bed and stared at the ceiling for hours, waiting for someone to come explain what was happening. But no one did. That's how it worked in Crestwood. You didn't get explanations. You got silence and sedation. The days bled together like bruises that never faded. I learned quickly not to ask questions, not to make eye contact, not to cry too loud. The staff didn't like disruptions. That's what they called you when you spoke too much or flinched at the wrong time. A disruption. They'd up your meds, strap you down, or isolate you for days in a room with no lights. I watched people disappear into those rooms and come back looking like shadows of themselves. They called it therapy, but it felt more like punishment. There were screaming fits at night, women howling like animals in cages, and sometimes I'd hear my name whispered down the halls. But I never answered. I refused to become one of them, no matter how close I came. I read everything I could get my hands on. I did push-ups until my arms shook. I counted cracks on the ceiling just to stay sane. I wrote letters I never sent. I built my strength in silence, like a soldier waiting for the next war. Because deep down, I always believed this wasn't the end of my story. I was not going to die in that place. Not like that. But don't think for a second it was easy. I broke too, more than once. There were nights I forgot my own name, forgot what real food tasted like, forgot how Naomi's voice sounded. They drugged me to the point where my hands trembled, even when I was still. I remember staring at my reflection in the small piece of mirror they let us have, seeing someone I barely recognized. My skin grew dull, my eyes sunk in, and my hair thinned out in patches. I lost chunks of time, whole weeks where I couldn't remember anything. And yet, there was still this fire inside me. It never left, even when they tried to smother it. It was the part of me they couldn't touch, the part that remembered what I did and why I did it. I held on to that moment, the moment I stopped that man from taking Naomi, like it was my last piece of truth. Because in a place like Crestwood, truth is the first thing they try to take from you. And if you let them, you forget who you are. And I couldn't let that happen. I had already lost everything else. I wasn't about to lose myself too. Some women gave up, and I don't blame them. Some pretended to get better just to get out, but they came back even worse. Others lost themselves completely. I watched one woman, Teresa, stop speaking altogether. She just sat in the courtyard every day, rocking back and forth like a broken clock. They said she'd been there 12 years. I remember wondering if that would be me one day. If one day Naomi would stop visiting. If one day my name would stop meaning anything to anyone outside those walls. But she kept coming, month after month. She'd bring me oranges, little bags of candy, books. Her eyes always looked sad, but she smiled for me. I lived for those visits. They reminded me there was still a world out there, that someone was still waiting for me, still believing in me, even when I stopped believing in myself. That's what saved me. Not the pills, not the doctors. Naomi, her presence, her loyalty, her pain. I could see it growing each time she came, and though I didn't know what she was going through yet, I could feel something shifting, something dark creeping into her life while I was stuck behind unbreakable walls. Years passed. I never had a clock, but I knew. I counted seasons by the clothes Naomi wore. I counted time by how much I aged each time I looked in the mirror, but I never stopped preparing. I trained my body. I trained my mind. I studied people, how they moved, how they lied, how they tried to cover guilt with fake kindness. I got good at knowing when someone was hiding something. I got good at seeing through walls, even the ones that tried to keep me small. I didn't let go of my rage. I learned how to control it, sharpen it, fold it into something useful. Because deep down, I always knew I'd need it again. Maybe not for me, but for someone I loved. Crestwood tried to erase me, but they failed. They didn't make me smaller. They made me focused. They gave me time to prepare for the day I'd have to become something dangerous again. So I waited. I watched. And I survived. Because that's what Crestwood taught me. How to survive white, cold, unforgiving walls without letting them bury who I really was. Naomi was the only one who kept showing up, and for a long time, that was enough to keep me breathing. Month after month, she came through those doors with a soft smile and a brown paper bag filled with little kindnesses, tangerines, a pack of honey candy, a book of poetry she knew I'd finish in one night. She always hugged me, held on longer than she needed to, like she was trying to squeeze her strength into me. But as the years went on, something in her changed. At first, it was little things. She'd flinch when I touched her arm, or forget the endings of stories she used to tell so well. Her laugh got quieter, like it didn't belong to her anymore. And then there were the clothes, long sleeves in the middle of July, scarves wrapped too tightly around her neck. Once, she wore sunglasses indoors, said her eyes were sensitive to light. I didn't say anything then. I just stared at her until she looked away, because I knew, I always knew. I just didn't know how bad it had gotten, not yet. What hurt the most wasn't what I saw. It was what she tried so hard to hide. Naomi had always been gentle, always the one to believe the best in people, to try and make everything okay, even when the house was burning down. That was just who she was. So I understood, in a way, why she tried to pretend. But each time she came back to Crestwood, she seemed smaller. Not physically, though she was losing weight, but spiritually, emotionally. Like life was draining out of her in slow leaks, and she was patching the holes with lies. I'd ask how she was doing, and she'd smile that tight, tired smile and say, "Just fine, Dee, just fine." And I'd nod. I'd pretend to believe her. But inside I was screaming, my hands clenched under the table, my jaw locked so tight I'd grind my teeth in my sleep. I knew someone was hurting her. I knew it in my gut, the same way I knew that Storm was coming back for me one day. Because pain like that doesn't show up for no reason. It lives somewhere. And Naomi's eyes were telling me exactly where. I started to notice other things too. The way she winced when she sat down. The sudden silence when she talked about home. The way she spoke about her daughter, Hope, in a whisper, like she was afraid someone might hear. She told me Hope was growing up fast, that she was spirited and sensitive like me. But then her voice would trail off. She'd look down at her hands. Her knuckles were always red, always raw. And then, just like that, she'd switch the subject, start talking about a new book or the flowers in her yard. But I couldn't focus. I couldn't breathe through the rage that bubbled in my chest. I was locked in a room, surrounded by white padded walls and rules and pills, and I couldn't get to her. That helplessness was a kind of death. Knowing something was wrong and being unable to do anything about it, it broke me in ways Crestwood never could. And still, I waited. I waited for her to say it out loud. Because once she did, once she gave me the truth, I'd have the permission I needed to become who I had to be again. And then, one day, she came in shaking. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely unwrap the candy she brought me. She wore a high-necked sweater, even though the sun was blazing outside. Her lips were cracked, and she had a bruise near her collarbone that her makeup couldn't cover. She sat down slowly, like every inch of her body hurt. I didn't ask anything. I just looked at her, and I waited. And then she broke. She started crying, real crying, not the polite kind she used to do. She looked at me with wide, glassy eyes and whispered, "He hits me, Delilah. He hits Hope." And my heart shattered into pieces too sharp to hold. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I stood up from that cold plastic chair with the kind of calm that only comes from years of waiting. And I looked at her, steady and strong, and said, "Take off your clothes," because I needed to see. I needed to know just how much damage had been done, and because I already knew in that moment what I had to do next. The day I walked out of Crestwood, I wasn't myself anymore. I was Naomi Jennings. I had her shoes on my feet, her cardigan over my shoulders, her name on the paper they handed me as I signed release forms with a hand that barely stopped shaking. My heart was pounding the whole time, not from fear, no. That part of me had burned away a long time ago, but from the weight of what I was walking into. Every step I took toward that life felt like lighting a match I couldn't unstrike. I wasn't going home. I was walking straight into a war zone disguised as a family house. And the worst part? That house had once belonged to the woman I used to be. But now it was Naomi's. Or it was supposed to be. I hadn't even seen it yet. But I already knew from the way she cried when she talked about it that it wasn't safe, not even close. That didn't stop me. I left Crestwood with my chin up and my back straight because that little girl, Hope, was still in there. And I was done waiting for someone else to save her. I remember the exact moment I turned onto that street in East Point. It was one of those streets where the air always smelled like something burning, rubber, grease, maybe old trash. The houses all sagged like they were tired of being alive, and Naomi's was no different. The yard was overgrown, the porch boards creaked like bones, and the paint on the siding had peeled away in long strips like a snake shedding its skin. But what hit me hardest wasn't what I saw. It was what I smelled. The second I got close enough to the front door, it came at me like a slap. Stale beer, sweat, old grease, and something sour beneath it all. Like rot, like despair soaked into the drywall. That house didn't just look like a tomb. It breathed like one. But I kept going. I knocked once, then used the spare key Naomi told me was under the flower pot. The moment that door opened, I knew everything she'd told me was true. And worse. Inside was a different kind of hell. Carlton Jennings sat on a torn-up recliner, shirtless, drunk before noon, a beer can balanced on his gut like it belonged there. He didn't even look up when I walked in, just grunted something nasty and waved a hand like I was late. That was my welcome. His mother, Bernice, appeared in the hallway next, clutching a cigarette and scowling like she'd smelled something foul. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just narrowed her eyes and said, "Took you long enough." Then she disappeared into the kitchen, muttering about dinner not cooking itself. And then Latasha came stomping down the stairs in a neon robe, her wig tilted like it had given up halfway through the day. She looked me up and down and said, "You look even more useless than usual." I stood there, taking it all in, every insult, every dismissive glance, like I was filing them away for later. Because I was. And then I saw her. Hope. She was sitting on the floor near the window, curled up in a corner, holding onto a doll that had no head. Her hair was messy, her face was blank, not sad, not angry, just gone. Like whatever part of her used to feel things had been smothered quiet. She didn't look up at me, not right away. Just sat there, rocking slightly, her thumb near her mouth like she was trying to decide if she was still small enough to need comfort. And when she did finally glance at me, her eyes weren't scared. They were tired. Too tired for a child. That was when I knew I'd made the right decision. That was when I knew I wasn't going back. Not ever. I had traded a padded room for a haunted house, but at least here I could do something. I could fight, and I would. That moment stays with me more than any other. The second I stepped through that door and saw the hell Naomi had been living in. It was worse than I imagined, but it didn't shake me. If anything, it hardened something in me. Because Hope wasn't just a reason anymore. She was the reason. Carlton, Bernice, Latasha, they didn't know it yet, but they had already lost. I'd survived Crestwood. I'd survived being erased. I wasn't afraid of any of them. I was prepared. I had stepped into that house not as a visitor, not as a victim, but as a woman on a mission. Every breath I took from that point on was for Hope. And I knew, without question. I would burn that house down before I'd let them hurt her again. Because that little girl in the corner, holding a headless doll, that was Hope. And Hope was mine now. They didn't know what to do with me at first. I stepped into that house like I'd lived there forever, like I belonged in it more than any of them ever did. I made coffee. I cleaned the kitchen in silence. I tucked Hope into bed without asking permission. And I watched. I watched every move Carlton made, every cruel twitch of Bernice's mouth, every snide glance Latasha threw my way. But I didn't flinch. I didn't explain myself. I gave no softness for them to twist or use. I looked like Naomi, sure, but I wasn't her. Naomi would lower her eyes. I met theirs and didn't blink. Naomi would apologize just for breathing too loud. I dared them to challenge my existence. The first time Carlton raised his hand at me, like he had done to Naomi for years, I caught his wrist mid-air. Just like that. And I smiled. Not out of joy, but because I wanted him to see I wasn't afraid. I wanted him to feel that moment crawl up his spine. I could see the confusion in his face, like he couldn't understand how this was happening. Like I had broken a rule he thought couldn't be broken. He tried to laugh it off, said I was in a mood, called me crazy, like the words still held power. But I kept my grip on his wrist a little longer than necessary, just until his smirk faded. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I just let go like I had made my point, and I had. From that day on, something shifted. Not enough to change their ways, but enough to make them take a second look before trying me. Same with Latasha. She tried barking at me in that whiny, bitter tone she always used, like her words were supposed to make me fold. But I just stared at her until she ran out of steam. It's amazing how silence can make someone feel small. Bernice still strutted around like she owned the world, but her eyes followed me now. She didn't like me in her kitchen. She didn't like me speaking to Hope without her hovering. But I stayed steady. I didn't bend. I knew it would take more than a few days to shake them. I wasn't looking for instant change. I was planting fear slow and deep. Trey, Latasha's boy, was a whole different monster. A little tyrant raised on violence and entitlement, always stomping around with too much mouth and not enough consequence. The first time he shoved Hope, I didn't shout. I didn't scold. I picked him up, lifted that boy straight off the floor like he weighed nothing, and I set him back down nice and slow, right in front of me. Then I crouched down and looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain. I just let him see me. Really see me. And he did. For the first time in his short, mean life, someone looked at him like they weren't afraid. Like they saw the ugliness in him and weren't backing away. He didn't hit her again. Not because he suddenly became good, but because I made sure he knew what would happen if he tried. You don't need to scream to be heard in a house like that. You just need to look at people like you've already survived worse than them. And I had. I'd lived with ghosts in my head and steel in my spine. None of them scared me. The funny thing is, even with all that tension, even with the hatred brewing behind every wall, the house got quieter. Not in a peaceful way. No, this was a different kind of quiet. The kind that hums with fear and uncertainty. They were waiting for me to slip up, to scream, to hit back, to prove I was dangerous. But I didn't give them that. I gave them calm. Cold, controlled, watchful calm. And it scared them more than any fight ever could. Carlton started drinking in the garage instead of the living room. Bernice stopped slamming cabinets. Latasha avoided me altogether. Hope, though, she started blooming, bit by bit. She laughed once at dinner. She started sitting closer to me. Her shoulders stopped curling in. That was my victory. Not loud, not fast, but real. They didn't know what to do with me. I wasn't Naomi. I looked like her, but I didn't bend. I didn't flinch. The first time Carlton raised his hand, I caught his wrist mid-air and smiled. The first time Trey tried to shove Hope, I picked him up like a kitten and set him back down on fear. Little by little, they understood. Something was different, but they weren't smart enough to fear it. Not yet. You'd think after everything, I might have underestimated them. But I didn't. I knew they'd come for me eventually. People like that don't just let power shift in silence. They tolerate what they have to, and when they think you're getting too bold, they strike. But they weren't smart. They were arrogant, thought I was still soft like Naomi, thought they could outmaneuver me with tricks and whispers. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, is that I had lived among wolves in Crestwood. I knew what poison looked like, dressed up in kindness. So when Bernice came to me one night with that bowl of soup, chicken, too warm, too sweet-smelling, I didn't hesitate. I took the bowl. I thanked her. I watched her face. And I waited. She smiled like she meant it, said, "You must be tired lately. You've been doing too much." Her voice was honey, but her eyes were nails, and I thought, this is it. This is how they start. The smell was the first clue. I've cooked enough chicken soup in my life to know what it should and shouldn't smell like. There was something sweet under the salt, something too thick, like the broth had been tampered with. But I didn't make a scene. That's the mistake they were counting on. They wanted noise. They wanted me to lash out, to give them a reason to paint me unstable again. Instead, I just nodded, stirred the spoon slowly, and kept talking like nothing was wrong. My hands were steady, but inside I was fire. I watched Latasha at the table, pretending to scroll her phone, but glancing over every few seconds. I saw Bernice exchange a look with Carlton, who barely even tried to hide the smirk tugging at his lips. They thought they were clever, subtle. They didn't know I'd already seen people bite off their own tongues in padded rooms just to escape. This was child's play compared to that. I waited until they looked away. Then I tipped the bowl gently into my lap, just enough to spill it down the side of the chair and onto the floor. I hissed, jumped up like it had burned me, and apologized over and over like a clumsy fool. Bernice got up fast, waving her hands, yelling about how expensive groceries were. Latasha muttered under her breath. Carlton cursed me for wasting food, but none of them noticed I never took a bite. Not one. And when I went to the kitchen to clean myself up, I found the bottle in the trash. Pill dust stuck to the rim, a half-torn label with Bernice's name on it. Sleeping pills. Strong ones. That's when I realized they weren't trying to kill me. Not yet. They wanted me unconscious. They wanted me silent, easy to carry, easy to disappear, Crestwood quiet. That's what they were after. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. That night, I didn't sleep. Not fully. I curled Hope up in my arms, held her the way no one had ever held me when I needed it. She didn't ask why. She just laid her head on my chest like she already knew. I stayed like that for hours, listening for footsteps, for the sound of doors creaking open. Nothing came, but I knew they were awake. I knew they were waiting for the pills to kick in, waiting for me to stumble, to fail. Instead, I laid there calm and sharp, letting every minute drag across my nerves until the sky started to change color. Hope breathed soft against me, safe for now. I'd seen what they were capable of, and now they knew I'd seen it too. That changed everything. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning, calculating. I had survived a place that was built to erase people like me. They thought a bowl of drugged soup could take me down? Please. So that was their first move. Bernice with her crocodile tears and poisoned comfort. Carlton with his silence and smug little grin. Latasha with her eyes always looking anywhere but at the truth. They thought they were setting the rules. They thought they were still in charge. But what they really did was give me the confirmation I needed, that this wasn't a house. It was a trap. And now I knew every inch of it. I knew where the knives were kept. I knew who slept deepest. I knew how the locks worked. They tried to break me the way they broke her. Bernice offered fake apologies and bowls of chicken soup that smelled just a little too sweet. They didn't think I'd notice. They thought they could make me sleep, drag me back to Crestwood in silence. But I watched them grind the pills. I watched them whisper. I smiled as I spilled the soup by accident. That night, I slept with one eye open and hope in my arms. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn. It was past midnight, that hollow hour when even the air feels dishonest. The house creaked like it always did, but that night something about the sound was off. More careful, intentional. I'd lived long enough in places where danger didn't scream. It tiptoed. And when I heard those floorboards shift under weight, slow and sneaky, I knew they were coming. Carlton's boots, Bernice's heavy breath, Latasha's soft little curse when she bumped the hallway table. I didn't move at first. I let them think I was asleep, that their little plan was working. But my eyes were open. My hands were clenched. I was ready. They thought I was just Naomi with a bad attitude. They forgot I'd survived Crestwood, that I'd slept through riots, through men pounding on steel doors like monsters. I knew how to breathe quiet, how to listen through fear. And I knew how to strike. The door eased open, and there they were, like some twisted parade. Carlton first, shirtless, holding a coil of rope like he was about to tie down a wild animal. Bernice behind him, duct tape already ripped into strips, dangling from her fingers like ribbons. Latasha, clutching something I couldn't see, maybe a rag or another roll of tape. My heart didn't pound. It roared. But I stayed still. I waited until they got close, just close enough to think they had me. Then I moved. Fast. I kicked out hard, catching Latasha in the ribs and slamming her against the wall. She crumpled like a scarecrow. Carlton lunged, and I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and brought it down on his skull with everything I had. The thud shook the room. Bernice shrieked, tried to run, but I was already up. I grabbed her by the throat, just enough to stop her, to make her know I could end it if I wanted. They didn't see it coming. That's what made it so beautiful. Carlton was dazed, groaning on the floor like a drunk who'd lost his legs. I dragged him by the collar and tied him to the bed with the very rope he brought to tie me. Tight. Mean. Then I gagged him with the duct tape and turned off the light. Bernice and Latasha were still outside the room, catching their breath, plotting God knows what. I opened the door, called out, soft and shaken. He turned on me. I need help. That was all it took. They rushed in, eyes full of hate, fists clenched, ready to finish the job. They didn't even hesitate. They saw a figure on the bed and went wild, kicking, screaming, beating. They thought it was me. And while they lost their minds, I stood in the corner with the old phone I'd stashed earlier, recording every second. The sounds were savage. Bernice calling me a filthy whore, Latasha yelling she should have done this years ago. The thuds of fists against flesh, the groans beneath the gag, Carlton's gag. I stood there, silent, steady, letting it all happen. Letting them write their own confession in bruises and blood. When they were done, panting and proud of themselves, I turned on the light. I'll never forget the look on their faces. Shock, then horror. And I smiled. He didn't fight back, I said. You really should have noticed that. They stumbled backward, scrambling for excuses. But it was too late. The truth was recorded, etched into digital memory forever. And suddenly, I wasn't the crazy one anymore. That night changed everything. Not just because I turned their own violence against them, but because I proved something. To them, to myself. That I wasn't trapped anymore. That I could outthink them, outmove them. They tried to tie me down like I was something to be handled. A threat to be neutralized. But I wasn't just a threat. I was justice with teeth. I was Naomi's rage and my own fury, braided together into something they couldn't understand until it was too late. And the best part? I had it all. On tape. It was past midnight when I heard the floor creak. Carlton, Bernice, and Latasha came creeping in with rope and duct tape, like a scene from a bad movie. They thought I'd be sleeping. They forgot I'd slept through riots in Crestwood. I sprang up, kicked Latasha into the wall, slammed a lamp on Carlton's head, and grabbed Bernice by the throat. I tied Carlton to the bed, gagged him, and turned the light off. When I lured the women in, they didn't even hesitate. They beat him bloody, thinking it was me. And I recorded every second. The sirens didn't scare me, not like they used to. I heard them from the kitchen, a low whine at first, building into that familiar scream that used to mean danger. Used to mean they were coming for me. But this time, I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I just stood there by the stove, flipping pancakes for hope like it was any other morning. Because this time, They weren't coming to drag me away. They were coming for the truth. And I had it. I'd spent the hours between night and dawn preparing everything. The video file copied 3 times. The phone charged and sitting right on the table. The rope Carlton had brought still tied to the bed frame. I even laid out the bloody duct tape like it was part of some crime scene exhibit. I didn't have to make anything up. All I had to do was show them what really happened. And when I opened the door and saw the 2 officers standing behind their cruiser with an ambulance right behind them, I knew the moment had arrived. They asked my name. I said, Naomi Jennings. Old habits. They looked past me into the house and asked who was injured. I didn't say a word. Just turned and walked toward the hallway, letting them follow. Carlton was still moaning, tied to the bed just like he'd tried to tie me. He wasn't bleeding as much anymore, but his face was swollen, eyes nearly shut, lips split in 2. Bernice was on her knees next to him, trying to explain, trying to make up some story about an attack. Latasha sat in the hallway, rocking like a child, eyes darting back and forth. The moment I stepped in with the phone and pressed play, everything stopped. The officers watched in silence as the video showed Carlton being beaten, the women shouting, the names they called me, the violence they poured out with no hesitation. It was all there. Every sound. Every lie they'd lived by, exposed. I saw it in their faces, those cops. The way their posture changed, the way their voices dropped low with something like disgust. Not at me, at them. One of them asked, "You recorded this?" I nodded. Every second. That's when things started moving fast. One officer called for backup. The other got on the radio for medical assistance. Carlton screamed something, but no one listened. Bernice begged them not to take her, said she was old, sick, didn't know what she was doing. Latasha cried like she was the victim. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth had already spoken louder than anything I could have added. And for the first time in my life, the law was on my side. Not because they cared about me, but because I had proof. Cold, clear, undeniable proof. That's all they ever needed. Not pain, not suffering, just evidence. They loaded Carlton onto the stretcher first. He wailed the whole way, like a man who finally realized his reign was over. Bernice fought them as they cuffed her. Latasha kept crying, her sobs echoing down the front steps like a bad memory. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, and watched them disappear into the daylight. The neighbors peeked through blinds. A few came outside. Some stared, some nodded. No one said a thing. But they knew. They had heard the screams for years. Now they saw the ending. Or maybe finally, a beginning. I didn't care what they thought. I only cared about the little girl sitting at the kitchen table, her legs swinging off the chair, her face calm for the first time. Hope ate her breakfast without a single flinch. No eyes darting toward the hallway, no sudden movements when the floor creaked, just pancakes and syrup and the quiet clinking of a fork against a plate. And I stood there, leaning against the doorway, watching her like she was a miracle. Because she was. A living, breathing reason for every fight I'd ever survived. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and I didn't care. That morning was enough. That stillness, that safety, that moment. The police came just after dawn, 2 officers and 1 ambulance. I handed over the video and watched their eyes widen as the truth played out. Carlton moaned on the bed, bones broken by the women who once protected him. Bernice screamed, Latasha begged. But it was too late. This time, I was the one holding the evidence. They took them away in cuffs and stretchers. And Hope ate breakfast in peace for the first time in her life. The silence after they were gone wasn't empty. It was holy. It filled every corner of that rotting house, like a blessing we hadn't dared to pray for. I stood in the middle of the living room that first morning and just breathed. No shouts, no slammed doors. No stomping boots or threats whispered through clenched teeth. Just the sound of Hope humming under her breath while brushing her doll's hair. For the first time since I left Crestwood, I didn't feel like a prisoner in someone else's war. I felt still, whole. The silence didn't scare me like it used to. It didn't make me brace for the next blow. It felt earned, like something we had bled for. I walked around the house with a trash bag and a broom and a heart that finally believed we had a right to start over. I cleaned. I scrubbed. I opened the windows wide and let the sun pour in like truth. Hope followed me everywhere at first, like a little shadow, quiet but watchful. She didn't ask when they were coming back. She didn't ask why I cried while sweeping under the bed. She just helped, picked up crumbs with her tiny hands, carried a rag, dumped dirty dishwater into the sink with a kind of seriousness that broke my heart. And then one day she laughed, just like that, out loud, sharp and free, over a dumb joke I made about the vacuum sounding like a dinosaur. And I froze, because that sound, it wasn't cautious or rehearsed. It was real. It was her. And I realized, right then, that she was healing, that we both were. I went through the closets and drawers, cleaning out old clothes, trash, things Naomi had tucked away to keep the peace. And that's when I found them. Hope's real clothes. Pretty dresses with tags still on, folded deep in the back of the closet. Naomi had bought them and hidden them, probably so Carlton wouldn't punish her for daring to want something better for her child. I showed the clothes to Hope, and she just stared at them, like she didn't believe they were hers. I helped her try one on, a pale yellow dress with little sunflowers, and she twirled in it like she was testing out what joy felt like. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go dig Carlton up from whatever cell he was rotting in and make him watch what he'd tried to crush. But I didn't. I just smiled, told her she looked beautiful, and helped her find some old barrettes to match. We painted her room together after that. Covered up the stains and cracks with lavender and clouds. I let her pick the colors, even if they didn't match. I gave her choices, every chance I could, because that's what no one ever gave us. Choice. I watched her make tiny decisions with so much care, and it broke something open inside me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't bracing for the next disaster. I was building something new, with her. Then came the neighbors. First, it was just the looks, longer than usual, curious, but not cold. Then nods. Then one woman from 2 houses down left a casserole on the porch with no note, just a gesture. A day later, there was a card in the mailbox. Plain white envelope, no name on the outside. Inside, it said only, "We saw. We believe you." I sat with that card in my hand for a long time, letting the words sink in, letting myself believe they were real. And for the first time in 25 years, I let myself believe in me too. That I wasn't crazy. That maybe, just maybe, I'd done something right. That I hadn't ruined my life when I picked up that iron shovel all those years ago. I'd been punished for surviving, for protecting. But now, in this quiet house that was slowly becoming a home, I felt something different. Not guilt, not shame. Pride, not for the violence, but for surviving it. So yeah, the silence afterward wasn't hollow. It was holy. Hope and I cleaned. We opened the windows. We laughed. I found her real clothes, the ones Naomi had hidden so she wouldn't get punished for buying her daughter something new. I watched the light return to Hope's face day by day. The neighbors started nodding at me. One left a casserole on the porch. Another slipped a card through the mailbox that said, "We saw. We believe you." And for the first time in 25 years, I started to believe in me too. Now I'm 58. My knees hurt when it rains. My hands crack in the winter. And my sleep isn't what it used to be, but I'm alive. More than that, I'm free. I sit on this old porch, watching the wind tug at the trees in the front yard, and I think about how far we've come. Hope is 16 now, taller than I ever imagined she'd be, and sharper than most grown folks I know. She's got that fierce streak in her, the kind that doesn't wait for permission. And when she laughs, God, when she laughs, it's like Naomi's voice coming back to me. A little softer, a little brighter. Sometimes it hurts to hear, but mostly it heals. Over the years, I've told her bits and pieces of what happened, just enough to help her understand why I look the way I do when I see certain things. Why I don't flinch at chaos, but I tense up at silence. why I watch people's eyes more than their mouths. But today I told it all. I told her everything, from the beginning, from the day I cracked that man's arm and got called a danger instead of a sister, from the cold walls of Crestwood to the first time I heard her cry in her sleep. I didn't sugarcoat a damn thing. I didn't make myself the hero. I didn't try to clean it up for her comfort. I wanted her to see me, fully, deeply, truthfully, because the truth is all I've got left. I told her how I swapped places with Naomi, how I walked into that hell of a house and decided it was going to be a battlefield or a grave, but nothing in between. I told her about the poison, the ropes, the bruises that weren't mine but felt like they could have been. I told her about the day the cops came and how the world finally tilted in our favor. And I watched her face the whole time, waiting to see what broke or shifted in her eyes. But she didn't flinch, she didn't cry, she just listened. And when I finished, she said, "I would have done the same." That's when I knew. Not that she forgave me, there was nothing for her to forgive, but that she understood. She saw what I did not as madness, but as love. As the kind of love that shakes the ground, that flips the table when no one's listening, that claws its way through locked doors and padded rooms to protect what matters. She understood that justice isn't always about courts and clean endings. Sometimes justice is messy. Sometimes it has blood on its hands and ash in its mouth, but it shows up anyway, because it has to. She asked me questions, not out of doubt, but out of curiosity, about Naomi, about Carlton, about what came after, and I answered every one, not hiding from anything, not this time. We sat on the floor afterward, eating leftovers, the kind of silence between us that only happens when something big has settled, not heavy, just present. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You saved me." And that's when I broke, not from guilt, not from grief, but from relief. Because for so many years, I didn't know if it had been worth it. All that pain, all that fire. But in that moment, with her hand in mine and her voice calm and steady, I knew it had been worth it. Every second inside Crestwood, every risk, every scar. I didn't just save her, I saved myself too. By loving her enough to fight when no one else would. By becoming the kind of woman Naomi always believed I could be. Not perfect, not gentle, but whole. Now I'm 58. Hope is 16. She's brilliant, stubborn, and carries my sister's smile. I've told her bits and pieces over the years, but today I sat down to tell it all. Not for sympathy, not for redemption, just so she'll know the truth. So she'll know that justice sometimes wears strange clothes. That strength can look like madness. That love, the real kind, the kind that burns and protects, is messy. But it saves lives. It saved mine. And it saved hers. Did this story move you like it moved me living it? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what part of the story stayed with you most. If my journey touched you, consider sending a super thanks. Your support helps me keep sharing these raw and honest life stories. Thank you for walking this path with me. On screen now, you'll see 2 more powerful life stories I believe you'll connect with. There's a whole world waiting for you here on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and truth.